welcome to the Church of Perpetual Life. It's my pleasure to welcome you, and I am so glad that you're here tonight. My name is Neil Vandry, and I am your officiator here at Perpetual Life. And if this is your first time, I would especially like to welcome you, and I hope that you find tonight's service to be of interest and to be quite enjoyable. Our mission here at Perpetual Life is to help everyone to have a chance for an unlimited lifespan with perfect health. We have regular services once a month where we have guest speakers who teach scientific rationality along with the Creator's plan that humanity evolve to achieve unlimited healthy lifespans. We record our services, and you can find our past recordings under our YouTube channel. And there's a link to this channel in our website in the top portion of the website. Our virtual service will be next month on November the 18th. So rather than the fourth Thursday of the month, because it's Thanksgiving, we will be on November the 18th. And we'll open again with a Zoom party as we have tonight at 6 p.m. And then our presentation, our live stream will be at 7 p.m., followed with a Zoom party afterwards. I'd like to recite with you the creed, our creed at Perpetual Life. Perpetual Life Creed, we believe that all of life is sacred and that we have been given this one life to make unlimited. We believe in our Creator's divine plan for all of humanity to have infinite lifespans in perfect health, eternal joy, rendering death to be optional. By following our gospel, we achieve eternal life, creating a heaven here on earth. We follow Nikolai Fedorov, who taught that the transcendence of the Creator will only be solved when humanity, in our unified efforts, become an instrument of universal resuscitation, when the divine word becomes our divine action. And we follow Arthur C. Clarke, who said, the only way to discover the limits of the possible is to go beyond them into the impossible. And so we enter each day energized in spirit and empowered by the words of our prophets to live in joy, serving our Creator and all of mankind forever and ever. Our events are always open and free to attend, and I'd like to invite you to share the information of our events with your friends and other longevity enthusiasts, your family, those that you love. I'd also like to let you know that we've been gifted some KN95 masks. If you're in the area, if you need any extra face masks, we can help you with that. And also want you to subscribe to our YouTube channel and tell your friends about those. Our event is being recorded tonight, and you'll be able to see it and share this event, this very event, with your friends immediately after our event concludes. So we have a great speaker tonight. I'd like to go right into is Dr. deGrey. He's an international adjunct professor of the Moscow Institute of Physics and Technology, a fellow of the Gerontological Society of America, the American Aging Association, and the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies. He's been interviewed in recent years in a number of news sources, including CBS 60 Minutes, the BBC, The Guardian, Fortune Magazine, The Washington Post, TED Talks, Popular Science, The Colbert Report, or Colbert Report, Time, The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, and the Joe Rogan Experience. We're very happy to have my good friend with us tonight, Dr. Aubrey deGrey. Welcome, Aubrey.
Yeah, well, of course, thank you for having me. You know, it's always a joy to speak to people in this community. I know that a lot of you will be wondering about my current situation. I can't say anything right now, but watch this space, as they say. The video that you're about to see is from a talk that I gave in Germany a long time ago, and I will be intrigued to watch it again myself, to be honest, because I have absolutely no idea what I said back then. But I will absolutely be on the call after the video has been shown to discuss anything that you want to have discussed, to give you updates, etc., etc. So let's do it.
To watch the TEDx video of Aubrey deGrey, You can search inside YouTube for Aubrey TEDx. The result you want is How We Can Finally Win the Fight Against Aging by Aubrey deGrey. Then you can continue watching our service. Or you can just continue watching our service without first watching the video. We resume now with our question and answer session. Thank you.
Chat box.
I see it.
Actually, let me read it.
I will read it out.
Okay, please do.
Yeah, so this is about mitochondrial aging. So as you all know, if you've seen my talks before, let alone if you saw this one, there is a major theme within science that is for the repair of the genetic component of mitochondria, the mitochondrial DNA. To be more precise, it's not actually repairing it, but making that DNA unnecessary by putting backup copies of it into the nucleus. And we've been making quite good progress on that over the past few years, especially just about 6 months ago, we made a really major breakthrough that I believe has a good chance of getting us over the line there. But as this questioner suggests, there is another new kid on the block, as he puts it, which is mitochondrial transfusion. In other words, the idea is you, rather than making mitochondria healthy despite having mutant mitochondrial DNA, you simply replace them with new mitochondria. Now, we are indeed quite interested in this, and we are about to start a project, in fact, we are starting a project on exactly this. But we are doing it a little bit differently than the people that the questioner may have heard of. The various people that are looking at this so far, there are 3 companies out there now, one of which spun out of Harvard. They are looking at just injecting mitochondria into tissue and hoping for the best, more or less. Now, you may think, well, hang on, mitochondria are supposed to be inside cells. That's a bit of a problem, isn't it? I mean, they're not going to be much use otherwise. That turns out not to be 100% true. If what you're doing is not treating aging, but rather you're treating a heart attack, for example, then near-term acute supply of energy in some way may actually be beneficial. And certainly that is the observation that has led to interest in this area. However, it would be nice if these things were taken up. It turns out that they are to some extent taken up by a process called endocytosis, which is essentially the cell surrounding the object that's outside the cell and dragging it in. But that has its own problems to do with the ability of those mitochondria to actually operate within the cell after they have been internalized. One of the companies that are working on this has recognized this problem, and they've found a kind of way around it. But what they have not done, and what we're doing, is to address a second problem which exists here in relation to aging, namely that mitochondria that are working actually experience a selective disadvantage relative to mitochondria that are broken because of having mutations in their mitochondrial DNA. That fact, that selective advantage that the mutant mitochondria have, is the main reason why mitochondrial mutations matter in aging at all. So we are looking absolutely at mitochondrial transfusion, but we're looking at combining it with a system where we take advantage of the fact that the mitochondria are in our hands in the petri dish before we inject them, and we modify those mitochondria so as to give them a selective advantage instead of a disadvantage, and thereby actually replace the mitochondrial DNA that is mutant in cells over time. This is, I emphasize, a highly ambitious project. It's the kind of thing that we specialize in at SENS, and we're just starting. So it may be a while before we get to work, but I'm pretty hopeful.
Thank you. Thank you, Aubrey. There's another question. I'll read the question for you. It's from Walter. Is there any hope for age reversal via targeted reprogramming of genetic expression, a la Altus Labs and Yuvan?
So I'm quite interested in the idea of targeted reprogramming, what's often called partial reprogramming, which is the idea that we essentially reverse the developmental clock of certain cells so as to make them more stem-like, make them more inclined to be regenerative. But I think that most people are going about this the wrong way. And it remains to be seen whether Altos Labs will do it the wrong way. I mean, they've appointed the real, the most high-profile person in this field, Carlos Belmonte, as their chief science officer. So, we'll have to see how open-minded he is. But the problem is that, of course, there are cells in the body that you don't want to be regenerative, cancer cells. And in general, we have found over many years that making the body better at regeneration has the the risk of also making it less good at defending itself against cancer. It's a complicated and difficult field, but this is the whole thing that people are worried about in relation to manipulating telomerase, for example. So I'm a little nervous about this. However, what I want to emphasize is that there may be ways around it. The method that Belmonte and others have used so far to engage in this partial reprogramming is to express what are called the Yamanaka factors, 4 genes that are active in the early embryo and whose overexpression can be used to turn back the developmental clock of cells in the lab, in a dish. It is really powerful, it really works, and that's wonderful. But because of the danger I described, it may not be the way to go. The way to go may be, Chris Manning asked, what was the word? Yamanaka, Yamanaka. He got the Nobel Prize in 2012 for this work, which was published in 2006. Easy enough to find. The thing is that these factors may be too strong. All that's been done so far is to combat that excessive strength of these factors by expressing these genes in a transient way, in a very regulated way. And that may just not be good enough in the body, because the body is full of a lot of cells that are almost cancerous already, and we would be awfully unwise to make them actually cancerous. And it's difficult even to find out whether we have, because it takes a while for the actual cancer to become, pathologically, clinically detectable. All right, so what can we do instead? Well, the company that I was working for part-time while sometimes therapeutic has been working on a new way of doing this kind of turning back of the developmental clock, which does not involve the Yamanaka factors, and which has the potential to at least reduce, if not eliminate, this problem I'm talking about, this cancer problem. Because the way that they're doing it involves different genes that have the ability to take cells back into a regenerative state, but not all the way to the ultra early state called pluripotency. That is what the Yamanaka factors do. And I believe that may be the way to go. So the problem at the moment is that Ajax has basically run out of money. They've got no people anymore. It's really a company and a technology in stasis. So when I talk about the the money problem having gone away in this field, it's not completely true, as I alluded earlier.
Aubrey, we have a follow-up question from the one before. Let me bring this up from Rayson. Assuming that one of the treatments works, can mitochondrial heteroplasmy cause illness, since everyone's mitochondria has different genes?
Well, okay. First of all, the mitochondrial DNA is very, very, very small. It's only 16,500 base pairs long. That's, ridiculously small. And actually, yes, it's true that there are differences between different people's mitochondria. But what we have to remember is that some differences matter more than others. The bulk of the mitochondrial DNA encodes proteins. So it's possible that these, as you correctly term it, heteroplasmy, in other words, if you give mitochondria from one person to another person, could end up with people having different different amino acid sequences, different proteins being expressed. But as of now, there is no strong evidence that any of this actually matters, that the differences between different people actually translate into different levels of function of the mitochondrial electron transport or respiratory chain. And even there's no real evidence that there's an immune response. In other words, that these foreign proteins come to the attention of the immune system and start to cause cells to get rejected. People have been looking for this for a long time because the potential problem has been, something that we've all been aware of. But the evidence that it's actually a problem seems to be
Okay, I'd like to invite those who are Zooming in this event to just, if you'll put your hand up, if you have a question or a statement that you'd like to make, just put your hand up. I'd like to call on you in person, or if you prefer to give your present question in the chat box, I'll take it from there if you prefer that. But a moment ago, Gennady was there. Gennady, would you like to address Aubrey?
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Aubrey, for your remarks. And my question is a follow-up to your comments on funding. Certainly, the funding problem, if it hasn't been solved, at least it's been made easier by various recent developments. But there is this concern that the funding may be appropriated by a certain faction that has advocated the so-called strategic conservatism approach of essentially giving the various mainstream gatekeeper institutions the kind of rhetoric that they want to hear and shying away from claims about greatly extending lifespan, about the first 1,000-year-old already having been born. I've seen statements to this effect recently on various social media spaces. So if that faction is the one that gets those funds for whatever reason, there is the concern that a similar situation may happen to the aging research field that happened to the nanotechnology field several decades ago. So how seriously, in your view, could this derail the arrival of longevity escape velocity? And how can those of us who support the more ambitious program of aging research help to ensure that this is the program that continues to be pursued?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. So let me give a fairly extended answer. First of all, the comparison with nanotech is very apposite. Of course, the concept was developed by Eric Drexler during his PhD, and in the form of real nanotechnology, in other words, molecular manufacturing, and the word was appropriated to essentially become synonymous with nanomaterials. And yes, absolutely, it's been very difficult. But Eric and his community had the problem that they really didn't know how to start. They didn't have any way to actually build these things, or even to begin the process of researching building them. That has somewhat changed, of course, over the years, but the fact is, molecular manufacturing is a lot further away than the kind of work that we do, rejuvenation work. That's a big issue. Now, in terms of appropriating funding, though, if we look at rejuvenation, I think we're safe for two reasons. First of all, because the influx of money that's been happening from the private sector, from actual investors, over the past 5 years especially, starting, of course, with Michael Graver, whom I name-checked in my talk that you just saw, and who much more recently, this past year, has upped his game a lot and put $300 million in. People like that, who are donating to Sense Research Foundation and other groups, but who are mostly investing, those are the people who are going to be mostly focused on the low-hanging fruit. Those are the people who might make it look as though there is the problem that you are describing. Because at the end of the day, anyone who wants to make money wants to make it tomorrow. and that's definitely how it is. But that's fine if there are also people giving substantial money to the leading edge, to the things that are not going to make anyone any money anytime soon. In other words, to the non-profits, specifically Sense Research Foundation, among others, but primarily. And that's happening. And it's happening across the board. So, of course, I mentioned already the airdrop, and of course the other support that we've had from crypto people, especially high-rolling crypto people. That's just going to carry on happening. The most recent news in that regard was only a week or so ago when the Buck Institute received 70 million, I think it was, from the guy who created Stellar Lumens. This is proper money, and there's something I want you to know about institutes like the Buck. They are not as pedestrian as they seem. They just have to seem that way in order to be able to pull money in from sources that are pedestrian, like the NIH. And the more they get money from people who are not pedestrian at all, like crypto bigwigs, the less pedestrian they will need to be. So I see a process happening where the more mainstream entities within the community, especially within the non-profit sector, are going to be able to move progressively and perhaps quite rapidly into the more radical way of thinking and doing. If we look at the work that is actually done at Buck, and we compare it to the work that's actually done at Sense, there's not all that much difference. In fact, we used to have this joke that if you wanted to read next year's annual report from the Buck Institute, it was easy. You could just read this year's annual report from Sense. And that's not entirely inaccurate. This is basically my sense now. I do not think we have an issue of things being made too mainstream. We sure as hell did have it. We sure as hell did. But I don't think we have that problem anymore.
Great. I'd like to bring up Naomi. Naomi has a question for you. She's got her hand up. Go ahead, Naomi.
Yes, hi. I think you kind of answered my question, actually. And I was just going to say thank you. The presentation was wonderful, and it was really good to see all of you. Yeah.
Yeah, I was quite amused by the fact that I was giving the exact same talk 5 years ago that I give now. It's a good thing, of course, that the whole business of this rejuvenation thing is standing the test of time. It's not having to undergo constant updates because things don't work when we thought they would. The updates are good updates, actual progress, and when we get surprises, they are good surprises, new technologies that accelerate things and give shortcuts. So that was very heartening. I see that Vladimir Butkov has a question. Says, is there any progress in whole brain emulation? Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, well, no, that's not true. Of course there is. But actually, I don't think it's quite the right question. I think a more important question is there any progress in brain-computer interfaces that might lead us to get to the point where whole brain emulation would kind of be obviated? In other words, where we essentially, where we work towards uploading, really, to the point where we can essentially train an external silicon-based thing to emulate the brain so well that, not just any old brain, but a particular brain, so well that it basically becomes that brain. And of course, there's progress, yes. I mean, I'm sure all of you have heard of Neuralink, Elon Musk's company. There are various groups. There's also Kernel, a company created by a guy whose career has more or less exactly followed the career of Peter Thiel, even including his company being bought by the same company, eBay. Then there are various academic groups as well. There's one at Berkeley that I'm particularly keen on. So yeah, there's masses of progress. And whether it will ever actually lead to something that we could call uploading, I don't know, but it might not need to. It has the potential to give us neural enhancement of a kind that may be a very powerful way to combat neurodegeneration before actual damage repair fully gets there.
So Aubrey, there's a question above, and then I'm going to read this question, then we're going to go over to Alexei. But first the question was, you started your career in artificial intelligence before becoming a biogerontologist. Do you have any recommended resources like books, online courses, that sort of thing, for computer scientists who want to follow in your footsteps and become self-educated biologists?
So yeah, I do, but not actually of the form that Brian is thinking of. The main resource that you have to have is self-belief. Because honestly, yeah, sure, I'm smart, but the fact is, I truly believe that any accomplished computer scientist would find biology pretty easy to get on top of. You can't rush it. There's a lot of information. There's a lot of stuff to learn. But the process of learning it is really pretty easy compared to computer science or maths or physics. In particular, it doesn't really matter in which order you learn things. It's a very horizontal subject, unlike one in which you have to, you have to really understand a particular body of information before you can even begin to understand the next one. So yeah, just believe in yourself. Go out and read the obvious things. Obviously read my book. But it's not hard to find. Just have dedication, have care to really know that you know things before you believe you know them. But at the end of the day, really just have self-belief.
Thank you, Aubrey. Alexei, let's bring you in.
Hi, thank you. You show us on a TEDx presentation, you showed us a really complex map of metabolism and signaling, right? Does this map mean that any small intervention, and a particular intervention, even in this one of the 7 areas that you mentioned before, does it mean the whole biostasis, the whole complex network of who we are, will react not as we expected? Not because this is a bad thing we did for the organism. Maybe this is right thing, but because we did it too much or too little, or we just didn't turn on a right exit, as to speak, on a pathway, on some chemical pathway. Yeah. And my question is, don't you think we need to somehow operate on a larger scale, on a scale of the larger model, and insert the results that gerontologists do, insert in the larger model of a human organism in order to predict anything, either disease or curing or aging? That's my question.
Yeah, so the essence of the whole sense concept, the whole damage repair concept, was really inspired by thinking about that exact question that you just asked. I looked at metabolism and I realized that we're never going to be able to uncouple, to disentangle the creation of damage from the stuff that we need metabolism to do to keep us alive. And the reason that I hit on damage repair was because we have an inherent window of opportunity there. In other words, the reason we only get sick from damage late in life, after we've been alive for a good few decades, is because the body is set up to tolerate a certain amount of that damage, right? So that means that prior to that point, the damage is harmless, it's inert, it's not participating in metabolism, in that network. So if we are able to remove that damage, we're inherently not interfering with the network, kind of by definition. And of course, this is a somewhat of an oversimplification, because first of all, any intervention that removes damage is not going to be 100% targeted, and there will be off-target effects that are impacting the network. But it sure as hell is a powerful distinction. it means that we have a much better chance of minimizing the side effects that you're talking about than we do if we are actually messing with metabolism itself. At the end of the day, what we are relying on with the damage repair approach is an absolutely, unarguable fact, namely that the human body is a machine, albeit a really complicated one, and any machine, its function is determined by its structure. So if we can restore the structure to something like how it was when the machine was working well in youth, then we are guaranteed to also restore the function.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to read a question from the chat box, and then we're going to go over to Ismail. And Ismail, if you could start your video so we can spotlight you in a moment. But this question comes from Darren. Ray Kurzweil refers to an exponential trend in progress in technology, including bioscience. Do you see this as a trend within longevity research?
Yeah, so it kind of depends how you measure it. And this is true for the other technologies that Ray has focused on when he talks about exponential change. Because if you look at the actual science that's going on at the lab, then you don't really see something exponential. It's plotting step-by-step approaches. But what's your metric? What's your actual quantitative measure of what's happening? You don't really have one, right? You just you discover things, you discover the next thing. If we ask a quantitative thing like how much are we extending mouse lifespan, then again it doesn't look exponential. In fact, it doesn't look as though it's changing at all. The world record mouse lifespan is still the same as it was when we created the Methuselah Foundation almost 20 years ago. So that doesn't look too good, does it? But of course, that's not how technology really works. When Ray talks about exponential change, he's talking about relatively smooth trends over a period of time when the technology is not being invented, but rather is being refined progressively. And you can't do that until you've invented it, right? So what we really need to be focusing on is reaching longevity escape velocity. In other words, getting enough progress in life extension, in humans, of course, to be able to stay one step ahead of the problem by subsequent advances. And the nature of longevity escape velocity is such that you can forget about exponential. It will be, from 0 to infinity like that. Once we're there, we're really there. I've talked about this. I wrote an editorial for my journal some time back, comparing and contrasting the singularity, which of course is something that Ray talks about a lot, with the Methuselarity, which is a word that a friend of mine coined some time back, to mean basically the point at which we reach longevity escape velocity. And there are similarities, but there are big contrasts as well.
Aubrey, let's bring in Ismail. Ismail has a question for you, and we'll spotlight him now.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. I'm from Spain. My English is a little bad, but my question is, what will be your advice for a person who wants to work in the field of aging, who wants to work in the field of aging? Sorry for my English.
No, sure, that's fine. Your English is much better than my Spanish. Well, of course, my advice depends on what you're already good at. Some people are wealthy and they can donate. Some people are scientists and they can do the right experiments. Some people are, diplomats, or they work in politics and they can advocate for public spending. There's a lot of different answers to that question. And whenever anybody asks me that question, by email, because I get a lot of fan mail, people asking me that question, I come back with those questions. I say, figure out what, there are all manner of ways to contribute. Figure out, number one, what you're good at. Number two, and I think I said this in my talk in Munich that you've just seen, figure out what not very many other people are good at. if you want to make a difference, don't just copy what other people are doing. So yeah, I don't want to generalize.
Yes, thank you, Ismail. A question from the chat box from Walter. He's asking, are there any prenatal or childhood interventions in the hopper to significantly extend healthy life?
It's a strange question, actually. Let me, since Walter's a great friend of mine, let me just make fun of him a little bit. Who gives a damn? I mean, honestly, we're talking about rejuvenation here. Therefore, the people that matter are the people who are not prenatal or in their childhood. The people who matter are people who are the same age as myself or Walter, because those are the people who are going to get sick sooner. But if we can figure out how to fix people like me and Walter, then we don't need to worry about childhood interventions. Now, of course, the motivation for such a question is that there's an intuition that we might be able to do things to people early in life that would simply not be possible late in life. And that's certainly important. The main example of this that often comes up is gene therapy, where, of course, it's possible in principle to do gene therapy in the germ line, in other words, in the gametes that form the fertilized egg, where you're only, messing around with one genome or two, which is technically far, far easier than somatic gene therapy. In other words, giving, manipulating the genome of a lot of cells in an adult. However, the point is for aging that you don't get sick from aging until you're 50 or more. And that means that you should not be comparing our ability to do germline gene therapy today with our ability to do somatic gene therapy today. You should be comparing our ability to do germline gene therapy today with our ability to do somatic gene therapy 50 years from now, which, is probably going to be considerably better than it is today, right? So that's why I don't really think about early life interventions in aging.
I have another interesting question for you, Aubrey. Vladimir has stated, I believe that the mission of human race is to give a birth to a super intelligent life, which will depart and in a long run will participate in the evolution of the cosmos. Do we have a plan for cooperation with super intelligent life?
Yeah, well, I guess this is the Church of Perpetual Life, isn't it? Honestly, I don't want to be rude, Vladimir, but the fact is, I'm a first things first kind of guy. I don't think about questions like this.
First, let's solve age reversal, and once that, we'll have lots of time to address many of these other things, I think. Daniel has a question here. Daniel states, I am currently 68 and retired and have been following Dr. deGrey for a long time. Is there any hope we will have aging repair treatments to partially roll back the clock in my lifetime? I realize this is a crystal ball type question. In the meantime, I am, of course, interested in doing everything I can to age well and last as long as possible.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity to ask this question. I actually met Dr. deGrey years ago at an Alcor confab, and big fan, and sorry for interrupting.
Thank you. Yeah, well, so let me answer the question in two different ways. First of all, yes, I think that people who are 68, at least people who are doing well for that age, have definitely a non-zero chance of making it through to benefiting from these therapies. My current bet in terms of how soon I think we have a 50-50 chance of reaching longevity escape velocity is only 15 years from now. So, 83 is, it's around the average age that people get to. And people who are at death's door when these therapies come along are probably not going to be able to benefit from them. But anyone who's got even 5 or so years of life left in them at that point has probably got a fair chance. So, yes, don't give up yet. But the other answer I wanted to give arises from what you just said about how we met. Because one thing I definitely feel very strongly about is that the underfunding of cryonics research is an absolute crime. It is a huge tragedy. This underfunding is, well, I'm doing something about it to the best of my ability. I'm, again, directing crypto money in that direction, but not enough of it yet. There are various research avenues out there right now to greatly, I mean, massively improve the quality of cryopreservation, which of course is, a bit of a prerequisite for actually bringing people back. I think we all know that prior to about 25 years ago, the process of cryopreservation was a complete waste of time unless one was willing to accept the possibility of being revived by uploading. In other words, being revived by warming somebody up was a complete non-starter because of the damage done by ice crystal formation. With the advent of really good vitrification in the form of this wonderful cocktail called M22 that was developed by Greg Fay and his colleagues at 21st Century Medicine, it's kind of like we're on the edge there. The people who are cryopreserved with the absolute best quality that can be done today maybe have a small chance of being revived by just warming them up. But still, it's really only a small chance. And of course, a lot of us do not feel very good about being revived by uploading. We don't feel it's the same person, etc., etc. So it is insanely important that more money should go into these research avenues. There's almost nothing in them now. One company that, of course, span out of Science Research Foundation, Aragos, is my favorite in this area. They're working on something called persiflation, which essentially involves massively increasing the speed of cooling of the body or the brain or whatever by pumping cold helium through the vasculature. This, seems to work pretty well. And I've been able to cause a certain amount of money to be directed into that, but not nearly enough. There's another technology called liquid ventilation, which again improves the rate of cooling, this time by taking advantage of the enormous surface area of the lung. And that too is in pretty much stasis. That research is just not being done. It's a crime. So yeah, that's something, for those of you who may be older than Daniel, or in less of a good state than Daniel for your age, this is something that you might want to think about.
Yeah, we need a good plan B, and we need to support the research both in your area and that. Thank you.
Yes. We have a question now from Darren. This question comes, do you anticipate that these therapies will be affordable to everyone?
Yeah. Okay, this is a nice, easy question. So yes, that's no question. They will definitely be affordable to everybody as soon as they're available at all. How am I able to say something so obviously utopian and unrealistic? Simply because today, when we don't have these therapies, aging is just like indescribably expensive to society. In other words, a huge majority of the medical budget of the Western world goes on the health problems of late life. Even the developing world, that's becoming true. So, and of course, most of the developing world will be developed by the time these therapies come along. So, the way to ask this question is not to say, will the humanitarian imperative to keep people healthy, sway public policy so that these things get subsidized. That I would hope it would, but humanitarian imperatives don't always have the effect we would like. Then one could say, well, okay, what about the electoral imperative? The fact that you're not going to be able to get elected unless you have a manifesto commitment to this. That also, elections don't always go the way we expect. But the third argument, I believe, is completely ironclad. The straightforward mercenary economic imperative that if any country does not make these therapies available, irrespective of ability to pay, in other words, with taxpayers' money, to everybody who is old enough to need them, then the country will go bankrupt, because other countries will do that and will end up saving money. In other words, these therapies will pay for themselves very many times over, very quickly. So there is no way in the world that this will ever be limited by ability to pay.
Great. I'm going to bring up Jeff's question, and then we're going to go over to Naomi. This question comes from Jeff, and he says, could you name the two most effective substances which could be taken to slow aging?
No, because there aren't any.
Okay, that was great. Naomi, we have you.
Yes, hi. I actually had a question about I know it's very controversial and some people don't agree with it at all, but if the embryo, if like an embryo type of, I don't know, manipulation of an embryo or transfer of an embryo or getting these elements from an embryo related to mitochondria would be more potent or help more. And also if CRISPR, if there is any type of possibility that CRISPR could assist with these mitochondrial benefits that you were kind of discussing. Yeah.
Okay, yes. So two separate questions there. So first of all, are products derived from embryos potentially useful in damage repair, in treating elderly people and stopping them from delaying any sickness? The answer is maybe, but it doesn't matter. The reason it doesn't matter is because of the Yamanaka factors that I was mentioning earlier. This is a method that can take cells from an adult and reverse their developmental age completely to 0. In other words, the cells become as good as indistinguishable from cells that one might extract from an embryo. So we don't need embryos anymore. This is really why we don't hear this conversation that was happening 20 years ago the way we did, right? Where it was actually of great scientific and medical interest to extract cells from embryos, and a lot of people didn't like that. Now we don't really have that problem anymore. These cells that you can make in this way, which is called by induced pluripotency, these cells are not absolutely 100% totally identical to embryonic stem cells, but they're so close as to make no difference, as far as we can tell anyway. So that's really why it doesn't matter. Now, in terms of CRISPR, different question. CRISPR, as it originally was created, does not work in mitochondria. Basically, you just can't get the stuff into mitochondria to manipulate the DNA. However, quite recently, past couple of years, a variant of CRISPR was developed and identified that appears to be able to manipulate mitochondrial DNA. That's in an early stage right now. However, what we also have to remember, and this comes back again to what I was saying earlier about competition, in other words, selective pressure. What we also have to remember is that it's basically no use to go in and repair some of the mitochondrial DNA in the body, because the repaired mitochondrial DNA, by virtue of having been repaired, will be outcompeted by the DNA that you didn't succeed in repairing. And we're never going to be able to just repair all of the mitochondrial DNA and stop that selective pressure from mattering. So we have to do something else. That's where the whole idea of allotopic expression came from.
So we have a statement first from Bradley and then a question to follow up. First, earlier, Bradley wanted to say to you that he wants to take a moment to thank you for all the work you have done. And he greatly enjoys your presentation at this year's RADFest. All of your pioneering work in this field is what motivated him to work hard and get accepted into the graduate program at Johns Hopkins University in Medicine, where he's studying both aging and human biogenetic engineering. So again, he gives sincere thanks, and he has a question that's a little bit off topic, but I'd like to go ahead and ask it. He says, I don't know if this question applies to this meeting, but one of my business associates who has contacted within DARPA has approached me to work with them on my research. Any thoughts on working with DARPA, pro or con?
Yeah, so very much I have thought. So actually not exactly about DARPA itself, but there is a new initiative called ARPA-H. I don't know why they didn't call it just HARPA, but anyway, a health version of DARPA. It's basically in the process of being created right now, and I have operatives who are actively and energetically ensuring that aging will be a very big topic of emphasis within this new entity. So yes, absolutely. The more cutting edge aspect, subset of the publicly funded, and in particular the government research activities are moving in the direction we would like them to be moving in. And I am very optimistic that that will make a big difference. Whether it makes a difference that is complementary to the difference being made in the private sector, and indeed, of course, in the non-profit sector with organizations such as SENS, remains to be seen. But I'm pretty optimistic.
Thank you. Now I'd like to bring up Gennady. Gennady has a question for you.
Yes, thank you, Aubrey. So given that you've stated that the strategic conservatism isn't going to necessarily derail the progress in trying to attain longevity escape velocity, what are you most concerned about in terms of risks to the progress of research on aging that actually could lead to longevity escape velocity being attained much later than 15 years from now, if at all?
So I think we can leave out the if at all part. I'm very sure that we will get there. In fact, I would go so far as to say that I don't think there's any real prospect that it would be attained much later, as in 30 years later, other than, of course, discoveries of new scientific, technological obstacles, which, is always an unknown. But even 1 year of delay is 40 million lives. So obviously I think about this a lot, this question. And my personal belief is that the number one risk is the technology catching people by surprise. I believe that we really need to be ready to mobilize the whole world, really, all industries, in a manner that streamlines things. And the biggest thing that can make that not happen is if particular industries that have a particular role to play that's different from what they're already doing don't realize it in time. So I give a lot of talks to financial institutions, banks and insurance companies and so on. And that's great because it means they care. So they bloody should, obviously. I mean, life insurance, it's their business, right? What we're doing. But historically, it was very difficult to get their attention. Now, I kind of have their attention, but only kind of. Because the thing that they often go away thinking, and say to me that they think, is that they'll worry about it when it happens. That, if it's 15 years away, most of the people who are currently on their books will be dead and they'll be retired, and who cares, really? And I say that that's the wrong way to be thinking. So I give talks to these groups which have titles like Anticipate the Anticipation. And what I mean by that is that forget 15 years, maybe 2 years from now, 3 years, 4 years from now, we are going to have sufficient progress in the laboratories, not even in the clinic, in the laboratory, right, that the center of gravity of expert public opinion, of stated expert public opinion, will be along the lines of, Aubrey deGrey was right all along. Now, when that happens, opinion formers of the, like Oprah Winfrey, are going to start properly paying attention. Oprah Winfrey got where she is today by having her finger on the pulse, right? And so, when that happens, all hell is going to break loose insanely suddenly. And the particular type of hell that I'm talking about here is people's expectation of how long they're going to live. At the moment, almost everybody believes that they're going to live only slightly longer than their parents did. But that will change almost overnight. And it's going to make a very big difference to a huge number of the really big bits of the economy. Life insurance, the big ticket items. So the upheaval is going to be enormous, and that itself could slow down not only the development but the dissemination of these life-saving technologies. It could slow down the ability of governments to fund the training and the building of infrastructure and so on, so that there's enough personnel and enough resources when the therapies do come along to actually provide them. That's the kind of thing that scares me the most right now.
Okay, first I'm going to go up to a question from Brian, then we're going to bring in Dennis. You said earlier that it would take half an hour to explain the background information on why each new breakthrough in age reversal is a big deal. Would you consider creating a podcast where you could explain the details for science enthusiasts without the time constraints of your other interviews?
Yeah, that's an absolutely excellent question, Brian. Thank you. And yes, we are indeed considering it. In fact, we're more than considering it. I'm not entirely sure that the podcast would be by me because, I have a lot of demands on my time. But certainly the scientists within the foundation, and indeed outside the foundation, within the community, are in a position to create such material. And I completely agree with you. I think it's a high priority. In fact, we would have done it years ago if we'd had the resources. As you know, we've got a lot more resources now than we did until quite recently. So yes, not only do I completely agree with you, it's in progress. It's being planned.
Okay, now we have a question from Dennis. Dennis, if you'll unmute, you can join now. And if you have video, you can join the spotlight as well.
Hello, thanks for having me. I've got a question for you, Aubrey. With all the clever applications and artificial intelligence and the ability to crunch large amounts of data, just like the other lady asked about CRISPR and other things, do you see any way of harnessing AI or big data crunching to tackle some of the specific problems in aging?
Oh, yeah. And in fact, it's being done. Some of the most successful and high value companies in the field right now already are exactly that. So one that I would definitely point to is in silico medicine and its subsidiary Deep Longevity. These are, another way, BioAge, which it does wet work as well, but which began as a bioinformatics company. There are a few others. So yes, absolutely. I mean, this is for drug discovery, and especially, we'd like to find, triages, I think that's the word, ways to, to nibble away at the edges of aging to an extent that gives a few people a bit more chance to live long enough to live forever, as they likes to say. And it makes money, which means that it gets money, it gets investment. So yes, absolutely. However, what I really want to emphasize here is that mostly the technologies that are valuable in high-end machine learning, for example, are not specific to aging. Rather, they are relevant with equal force across the whole of medical research. So the most obvious example here is the protein folding problem, the idea of being able to take the amino acid sequence of a protein and predict what its three-dimensional shape will be when it is synthesized. This is something which I guess many of you will know was more or less completely solved last year by DeepMind with the program AlphaFold. Now, of course, I'm, again, eliding a lot of details there in terms of exactly how well it's solved, but I think I can get away with that, honestly. I think this is as good as solved. And that makes an enormous difference to drug design, drug discovery, drug development, as well as, for that matter, to genetic therapies, to identifying ways, modifications that one might make with CRISPR, for example, in order to achieve some particular effect. But as you can tell, it's nothing specific to aging. It's for the whole of medical research.
Do you have any idea of anything specifically that we could point AI at, or not really yet?
Well, I mean, as I say, that example, that is definitely AI. AlphaFold is definitely AI. Definitely there are other examples. Yeah, I mean, sure. Remember what AI really is, right? It's doing pattern matching better than humans can, right? Extracting patterns and thus information from noisy data. And, that's what all of these companies are doing. They are looking at data that for a human being is utterly uninterpretable and extracting information from it that is actually useful. This would certainly be the case in terms of most experiments that people do in the lab, that need to identify things like, what proportion of cells on a dish are alive, or, what proportion of them are breathing. These are things that one probably has the information just by looking down a microscope, a sufficiently high-powered microscope. But one doesn't know that one has the information. So this is the kind of thing AI is good at.
The next question is coming from Ronald.
Yes, Aubrey. My question is about health management. We have the allopathic medicine, and then we have a lot of the anti-aging, advanced type of therapies available already. In order to actually bring about the solution to somebody, you got to first assess and diagnose. You have to take somebody's medical data, age, all this epigenetic data, as much as you can get, blood tests, and then you should have that somewhere in a database. Now, who should we trust with that database? I do not like the idea of Google owning my DNA information and genetic information. I do not trust a third party for profit to have that data. I would like to have a vault that is under my control, similar to a co-op, where everybody can upload their data. So anywhere in the world, if I want to give permission to some institute to review my data or use my data for polling, I could do that, and it can be stripped so it's compliant with some HIPAA laws. My biggest question is, in order to bring about the right therapies and bring about the results today, without assessing that correctly and have some kind of a data management system, we could not even apply AI really that well, because we don't have the format with all the fields and data in one place. Is there any place that you know of today that you trust, that you think is going in that direction?
Not exactly, but I can give a better answer. So the field is moving in that direction. There is a strong appreciation that, especially with the recent advances in machine learning over the past several years that I referred to in my previous answer, especially with that access to enormous quantities of data is enormously useful for developing new therapies. Therefore, the only real problem is to organize the incentive structure so as to ensure that the vested interests of people who have this data and of people who could use it are aligned. And people are finding ways for that to happen. Of course, you mentioned that anonymization of the data is often very important. Fine, but yes, the requirement here really is the incentive structure. It's to get companies, especially, to understand that it will be in their long-term financial interests to share data that they might not previously have thought they ought to share.
Okay, I see. Yes, obviously the incentive is always different. The incentive to a corporation, if the employees, let's say if you have a large corporation, if they went on a program, that could lower the insurance premiums. So there is the insurance company that should have an interest in keeping people healthy. They have more productivity. And naturally, there's the personal interest. I tend to believe to bring change to this healthcare system, which I'm not happy about at all. I never had a big faith in our current healthcare system because I consider it to be a disease care system. So there's certainly no prevention in that. And what I'm more interested is in from a patient perspective. Since you're going to have all these molecules in the future that become available, maybe in limited blind studies that you can participate, so you can test some of the newest stuff out there if you want to participate in it. But I'm worried about not being able to control that data and also give access to the people I choose to give that data to then come up with a customized solution. And there could be, 100,000 therapies and possibilities. But once somebody has your epigenetic data, your medical history, with AI, it should be possible today to come up with, out of 100,000 possibilities, with maybe 3-4 recommendations, sequentially what to do, what comes first, what comes second, etc. And then you could maybe have a dial where you could choose how aggressive you want to be. Do you want to just slow down aging naturally, or do you want to maybe slow down aging and reverse aging? That demands a much more aggressive approach, and that should be, so to speak, all done from the perspective of the user. The moment your incentive is monetary, I have no problem with making a profit, but I have a problem when there's all these healthcare services being offered out there, but there's zero management of it. So in other words, if you go today to the hospital, they may do all kinds of tests, but they'll blow $20,000 on tests and MRIs and whatever, and then that data somewhere stays residual on their server and maybe could be analyzed somewhere else. But that's not what they're interested in. They look at your insurance and they charge you according to what you can pay. And it's all these services getting pushed. It's a push-down system. But then on the other side, there's no zero management whatsoever. And that's even in the conventional medicine that is super expensive. And I'm Swiss, so I'm a little bit used to a different system than here in the United States. But I don't think the system here is that great either. I'm not very impressed with it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really have any, magic bullets here. These are the same problems that exist in any industry, really. But I believe that the financial, the economic benefits of developing these therapies as quickly as possible and making them as available as possible are the basis for the solution. All that is needed is to make the people who need to make the right decisions aware of the economic value to themselves, whether it's a company, whether it's a government, whatever, of making those correct decisions. So it's really just an education thing. I don't personally have too many concerns about privacy, but of course, plenty of people do. I'm not saying one should not have those concerns. But really, it's not the issue. The issue is the economic incentive structure.
Darren has asked, does intermittent fasting extend life? And is there one diet which is better than the others for this? What do you think?
Yeah, right. So intermittent fasting is, of course, the kind of the newfangled version of calorie restriction, which was discovered in rodents nearly 100 years ago to extend longevity quite a lot. However, it has become very clear. In fact, it was already clear 20 years ago, and I was rather irritated that it was being swept under the carpet, that calorie restriction works considerably less well in long-lived species like humans than in short-lived species. And indeed, the reason why it works considerably less well is easy to understand from an evolutionary biology perspective. So we should not expect to see all that much, maybe a year or two if we're lucky, from calorie restriction in humans, and even then only if it's lifelong. rather than, initiated in middle age, for example. Now, intermittent fasting has exactly the same problems. Really, the only difference between regular calorie restriction and intermittent fasting is that intermittent fasting is easier to do. It doesn't make you hungry all the time. But it's not gonna make you live substantially longer any more than regular calorie restriction is. And of course, the same applies to calorie restriction mimetics, drugs that are designed to trick the body into thinking it's on calorie restriction when it isn't. And that includes most of the things you hear about these days: rapamycin and metformin and resveratrol. So yeah, I mean, probably marginally better than nothing. But honestly, so much not the real McCoy that I don't really spend much time thinking about them.
Okay, we have one last question from Jeff.
My question was, there was a nutritionist on the Dr. Oz show, and he was asked, what's the, he did some research, longevity and so forth, and he said that he thought that taking prebiotics and MCT oil every day is the best bet, because he said he measured all of his biomarkers before he started on this routine of taking these things. And then he measured it 3 months later, and he was like 10, 15 years younger. Does that sound feasible to you?
One thing you got to remember about anything you do to your body is that if you're messing with metabolism, if you're taking drugs that interfere with or modify this enormous incomprehensible network, then everybody is different. So, of course, it's possible that one individual testing something on himself is, he's going to experience really big benefits. But that absolutely says nothing about reproducibility across a population.
Okay. How about, there was a presentation a couple of months ago on Niagen, also called NAD Plus, that they sell on Amazon for about $70 a bottle. Do you think that's something that might have effectiveness?
Yeah, so that comes under the same category I mentioned earlier of calorie restriction mimetics. Actually, what's normally sold is not NAD plus itself, but rather certain other molecules that are converted into NAD plus after you have taken them. So there's something called NMN, there's another thing called NR. The idea here, again, is to essentially trick the body into thinking it's on calorie restriction. I could spend the next 10 minutes explaining how that works, but that's what it does, and therefore we do not expect to see significant benefits.
Okay.
Okay, great. We're just about to close out now. I have just one last question here that came up, and let's see what this was. No, it's comments. It's comments about the job you're doing, and I think that we're all so appreciative of all the work that you're doing, Aubrey. So
I get a from Brian. He says, you've earlier said that you've spoken with Jeff Bezos. Would you ever last labs? I don't work for people.
Okay. Aubrey, we are so appreciative of you being here tonight. Thank you for your presentation and for your questions and answers. I'd like to invite everyone who's here to stay in place, and we're going to have a Zoom party after this, after the formal closing of our live stream. And I'd like to remind everyone that we'll be back here again November 18th. It's the third Thursday in November, where we'll be live streaming, and we have a presentation by Bill Falloon. So in the meantime, if you haven't yet connected with us, where you can receive a newsletter from the Church of Perpetual Life, please send me a message. I'll get you connected on the newsletters. Thanks for coming tonight. And Aubrey, thank you so much for your presentation.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you all for having me. It's been a real joy being here.
Thank you, Aubrey. Thank you.